All right. Hey, everyone. We are going to get started here at 6:05. Thanks for joining us tonight. We have a bunch of people and exciting speakers planning to talk, but I'm just going to quickly go through our agenda for folks, and you'll see in the chat the sign-in sheet, which please fill out so that we know you're here. My name's Ariel Klagsbrun. I'm an organizer with ACRE, the Action Center on Race and Economy, based here in Philadelphia, working with the Philly Revenue Project, which we'll talk about more tonight. So you are at a teach-in called Tax the Rich, How We Fund Our Communities, and I hope you know why you're here. But if not, we will go over some of our goals for tonight. So we're hoping that, together we can learn about how we fight for our communities and what our communities need in the budget. We're going to prepare to take action together to demand that the rich pay their fair share as we enter the budget season here in Philadelphia. And we're hoping that folks are going to join our long-term and sustained campaign to organize for just and fair budgets here in the city and for city services for all Philadelphians that are equitable and just and meet the needs that people have. And, I know folks have spent a good amount of time on Zoom in the past year, but just some reminders later on, we're going to move into breakout sessions. So just reminding people to use respect, to speak from their own experience, and to this term move up. And so keep speaking. And if you're somebody that takes up a lot of space, maybe a move for you tonight is to try to let others take up a little more space. And then just our agenda tonight. So we're in the welcome section right now. We're going to hear from some workers here in the city and community members about what the city budget means to them. We're going to learn about the budget together, and then we're going to go into breakout rooms, talk a little bit more about what we've learned, and then come back together for next steps and really a call to action around this budget season, which starts in a couple of weeks here. And who we are. So today's endorsers and partners are a wide array of organizations from across Philadelphia. You can see, you can see here that we represent public city workers, educators at both CCP and in the Philly School District. We represent folks fighting against oil refineries and for equitable housing, fighting for public banks. So this is a wide array of groups. We have been working together for a while now under the banner of the Philly Revenue Project that really came out of the massive threats to public services last year during the beginning of COVID, but have built on years of organizing against austerity and for just public schools, just city services. And these organizations are carrying this banner forward and will continue to do so for years to come. And I'm going to pass it now over to Shane to lead our introduction.
Hi everyone. My name is Shane. I am an organizer with Socialist Alternative Philadelphia and a member of the Philly Revenue Project. I think we can stop sharing screen. So the next thing on our agenda is that we're going to hear from some personal stories from members of our community who are going to tell us why this budget matters to them. Like, why is it a personal issue, and how the city budget shortfalls affect people at work in their neighborhoods and their communities. Our first speaker that we're going to hear from is a city worker in the Parks and Recs Department, a rank and file member of the AFSCME District Council 47, and a member of the New Unity Caucus within that labor union. Welcome, Brett Besler.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak at this meeting. I am a recreation leader at D. Silvestro Playground. It's in South Philadelphia with the Philadelphia Parks and Recreation System. Really quick, I just want to give everybody a little bit of a rundown of Philadelphia Parks and Recreation. Oftentimes, we don't really consider how big the Philadelphia Parks and Recreation System is. So, really quick, brief capture of Philadelphia Parks and Recreation. We have 300 plus neighborhood parks, rec centers, and playgrounds. We have 166 miles of trails, 40 historic sites, 60 community garden, farms, orchards, 3 environmental education centers, 600 plus baseball, softball fields, football, and soccer fields. We have 74 pools. We have 3 times the amount of public pools in New York City. We have 400 plus basketball and 200 plus tennis courts, 5 ice skating rinks, 5 public golf courses, and 25 public computer centers. Now, as a whole, our city has one of the largest urban parks and recreation systems in the country, if not the whole world. While the amount of physical assets that Parks and Recreation has and our city has is very impressive, we often make no mention of the staff that maintains and brings our community spaces to life. In normal times, Parks and Rec staff provides an after-school programming, summer camp, teen and youth development, senior programming, athletics, cultural, performing arts programming, the list goes on and on. Simply put, our Parks and Rec system used to be the gold standard when it came to public spaces, but throughout the years of divestment, stagnant budgets, or even budget cuts, this once gold standard system is now left with inadequate facilities and has become severely understaffed. This is all before COVID. And then COVID happened. And as always, Parks and Rec staff stepped up for their communities and did food packaging and food distribution, summer camp programs for over 2,000 youth, hundreds of virtual programs, and facilitated the city's student access centers, a free resource for families and youth to utilize for their virtual learning, 7:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. for the entire school year. All the while maintaining this massive system that we actually saw an increase in visitors through COVID. And we did all of this past year under a 20% budget cut for fiscal year 2021. As a citizen of Philadelphia, I would call on the mayor and city council to restore and increase the Philadelphia Parks and Recreation System's budget by any means necessary. If the existing revenue streams cannot sustain such an action, alternatives must be explored and adopted. We must tax the wealthiest individuals, for-profit and nonprofit organizations within our city. The time has come for these individuals and organizations to pay their fair share and invest in our communities that they profit from. That's really all I have. Thank you for your time.
Well said, Brett. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is a staff member at the Community College of Philadelphia, a member of the AFT Local 2026, that's the American Federation of Teachers, is also a co-chair of the union's Bargaining for the Common Good campaign. So to help me welcome Corey Budden.
Thanks, Shane. I work at the Community College of Philadelphia, and just to give you a brief introduction on CCP, we provide affordable public higher education for first-generation college students, immigrants, single parents, working adults, as well as recent high school graduates. 72% of our students are people of color and 66% are women. With over 25,000 students enrolled, both credit and non-credit, we educate the most undergraduates in the city. We also educate the most Philadelphians and the most poor and working class college students. CCP is a vibrant reflection of Philadelphia communities, an integral part of our collective future. So currently the situation is, traditionally the city is obligated to fund a third of the college's operating budget. It's supposed to be a third the city, a third from the state, and a third from student tuition. The city has not met this obligation and paid their fair share of our funding since 1983, which is before I was born, maybe before some of you were born. This gap in funding affects The functioning of the college in several ways, but most importantly, is fallen directly on the shoulders of our students, whose tuition is currently responsible for half of our entire operating budget. In the poorest large city in the US, CCP's tuition is disproportionately expensive. While many of our students qualify for aid like Pell Grants, they're often also forced to take out student loans to cover the cost of tuition. Inevitably, a portion of our students who take out loans will also default on those loans, as low-income communities disproportionately bear the brunt of the student loan default crisis. The gap in funding from the city, as well as the state, has also led to an over-reliance on enrollment numbers at the college. Perfect example of this is when COVID first hit, college administration immediately anticipated a drop in enrollment and threatened employee layoffs if the union didn't agree to give backs from our contract. Fortunately, the union fought against these measures and won, yet this still shows how our employment at the college is framed as being contingent on the ebbs and flows of enrollment. A significant portion of students in Philadelphia will directly experience the effects of disinvestment in their education from the time they begin kindergarten all the way through their higher education experience at CCP. Our students deserve more than that. Progressive revenue, making millionaires, billionaires, mega nonprofits, and corporations pay their fair share will help ensure that the mayor and city council can no longer dodge fully funding their obligated portion of CCP's operating budgets. Our students could avoid costly student loans to pay their tuition. Our faculty wouldn't be forced to teach larger class sizes, resulting in lower quality education. Every member of our classified staff could earn a living wage, and CCP could provide more opportunities for students, faculty, and staff to thrive. With proper support and funding, CCP could truly be a community-driven college that is affordable for all Philadelphians. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Corey. And yeah, as a person with, just as much student debt as the next person, I think that this is a really important information for us to give, for us to be getting today. And I just wanted to take a step back. We still have some more speakers, but I just wanted to, people have been doing an excellent job, but just want to encourage that, this is, us community event for us to share with each other, that putting information into the chat of you're introducing yourself to each other, and the way that we've been encouraging the speakers, just really loving it, and just wanted to say that out loud to everybody. So our next speaker is a teacher in the school district of Philadelphia at the Simon Gratz Mastery Charter School. As a community member in Northeast Philadelphia. So help me welcome Charles Gathers.
Hello.
Yep, we hear you, Charles.
In terms of the funding we need for the city, we really need help in terms of the children after school programs and stuff like that. Working in the school during the pandemic was different because we were on computers, and most of the children that I deal with now are special need or artistic children, and they need to feel and they need to touch. So by them were on the computer and they couldn't see the teachers or see anything, it was very difficult. And now that we're sort of back in the building, it's different. And they're gonna need extra help. We're gonna need more funding and stuff like that. And in terms of I had some stuff written down when I was listening to Brett, listened to all the parks and recreations that I was unaware, and I've been in Philly all my life. Basically, this is the main thing I wanted to say was the communities and families need to work together to fight during this funding for a few months. A few months back, one of my youth, I'm sorry, I'm all over the place. I worked the whole gamut. I did substitute teacher and long-term sub in the school district of Philadelphia. Then I went over to charter schools. I also did one-on-ones and I also worked at adjudicated facilities and some group homes. So I kind of know a lot of the youth in the city. So going back in terms of the generous funding we need, a few months back, a youth was in the situation out West Philadelphia, and he ended up getting shot and killed. And I later found out that that was one of my youth. So what I'm saying tonight, speaking about in terms of if the community was together, if it was well funded and stuff, that that shouldn't have took place. And the cops did it, you know, pulled the trigger, but the community also played a part in that because they didn't. It wasn't band together in terms of togetherness. It was just horrible when I think about in terms of if things were in place, that should have never took place. And that's all I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charles, for, and I just want to, express condolences. That's a terrible thing to experience. But thank you so much for sharing. And it's just the amount of, violence in my neighborhood that, the shots I'm hearing and just the explosion of violence in Philadelphia right now. I think we'll speak more about, the role that the police are or actually are not playing in, protecting us and the way that their budget is completely outsized. But I think that, tying that in with education is extremely important. And just thank you so much for your story. We're gonna have our last speaker is a public school teacher at Kensington Health and Science Academy. He's a member of the PFT, the Philadelphia Federation of Teachers, and the Caucus of Working Educators. So help me welcome Paul Prescott.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for so many people coming out. So I know that sometimes when we talk about the budget and progressive revenue, it sounds a little crude, like just about dollars and cents. I want to speak briefly about the human side of this and why we need this revenue and what it goes towards. So back in 2013, some of you might remember this, Governor Tom Corbett passed the doomsday budget, as we call it. And this was a massive wave of cuts to public school funding. Schools were closed, teachers were laid off, full-time nurses were taken away from every building. And during that school year, 2 students died from a health emergency in school because a nurse was not on duty. Class sizes have ballooned, and it's not rare anymore to have over 40 students in a classroom. And, relating to what the previous teacher said, that, often we have students with special needs, English language learner, and you can't give them the attention they need with 40 students in the classroom. And of course, we have the conditions of our school buildings. Many of these buildings are 80, 90, 100 years old. They're infested with mold, with lead and asbestos. We've had a few cases of roofs caving in. We know the ventilation isn't safe, which has been in the news lately with COVID and returning to school. And so this is what it looks like when governments choose to cut funding, when they choose austerity. So we need this revenue to make sure we have nurses on duty so students aren't dying. We need money to hire more staff so class sizes aren't so big. We need money to build schools that are actually fit for human beings. And don't let them fool you. The money is there, and it's just not going to us. Comcast made a profit of $25 billion in 1 quarter of 2020. And the CEO, Brian Roberts, made $100 million last year alone. Yet Comcast, they get to avoid taxes by setting up their headquarters in Delaware. Jeff Bezos added $90 billion to his wealth during the pandemic, while the workers who are working in the warehouses and delivering your packages barely make a living wage. Pennsylvania is the 2nd largest producer of natural gas, and the largest natural gas company pays no taxes to the state. And the University of Penn sits on a $14 billion, billion with a B, $14 billion endowment. It doesn't pay a dime in property taxes. And if you're not furious right now hearing this, you should be. This money is ours, and I think it's time to take it back and invest in the public good. And think about who kept society running during the pandemic. It was nurses, it was package delivery drivers, it was sanitation workers, grocery store workers, teachers. It wasn't CEOs and hedge fund managers. And we haven't profited during the pandemic, but we are the coalition of people that can unite and win more revenue for our public services. And anyone who taught in the school district of Philadelphia during the Corbett years knows that we cannot layer another round of austerity on top of what's already been done. It's going to be a disaster. So again, thanks for having me. And again, we really need progressive revenue, so we have schools that our children deserve.
Thank you so much, Paul. And yeah, I think I agree with so many people in the chat that, like, yes, I am furious. Yes, that money is ours. And yeah, that's what we're here to talk about exactly is, how do we, frame this fight? How do we expand this fight and to, get as many people involved as possible? I wanted, since we're a little teeny bit ahead of schedule, and I'm going to take a chair's prerogative to share a little bit of my experience. So I'm a member of Socialist Alternative, but also I'm an educator at a center called Natural Creativity Center. And it's a nonprofit. It's, is our clientele is homeschool kids. And it's just so clear to me. I've worked there for, it'll be a year coming up. And the, who has access to this, like, very, individualized education, who has access, whose parents have, decided to put their young people into a system where, they get to determine, like, what they want to do. It's just, it shows me what's possible and, like, how, it's not because, like, teachers or adults are not well-meaning, or or it's really, it's about funding, it's about access, and it's about the priorities of the people in charge. So yeah, I'm just I'm so grateful to be part of this, so I can kind of link up more with teachers working in the public school system, and, like, to strengthen those relationships. So I think it's so important. So we are now going to transition to the more educational part of the evening, where we're going to hear a presentation. So we have two brilliant members of the Philly Revenue Project that are going to give this presentation for us. We have Ermi and we have Britt, who are going to do that for us, and they're going to give us some more information about themselves, introduce themselves. So turn it over to them.
Great, thanks, Shane. And as Ariel pulls up the presentation again, I just want to say my name is Ermi Mella, and I live in the Whitman section of South Philly. I'm involved in my neighborhood through Friends of Whitman Library, Friends of Mifflin Square Park, and as a South Philly reading captain. And I'm going to take the next few minutes to just talk through how the budget is put together and the timeline that we follow to secure a budget before the next fiscal year. And I just want to talk a couple minutes about why I'm involved with the Philadelphia Revenue Project. A lot of the folks who are part of the coalition are part of unions or organized groups. And as just resident of Philadelphia and a long-time resident, I'm interested in making sure that all of the people in our communities have access to safe and fully funded services. And I believe we need to start laying the groundwork now for understanding how the city budget is put together, works, and how we can all have an impact on it. I believe that we're more powerful together, and this is just the beginning of a long game to make sure that the city can generate revenue to fully fund all of our services. So what is a city budget? We might think that a city budget is just a fiscal plan to show us how the city is going to spend money throughout a year, as well as how it's going to generate the revenue. It is how City Council and the mayor plan to spend our tax dollars. What we know is that it is really a political tool that reflects the real priorities of elected officials. City Council is challenged with balancing the desires of their donors, voters, and public opinion. What we have seen and are tasked to do is apply political pressure from all of us, the residents of Philadelphia who are served by city services, to make sure that our needs are reflected in the budget priorities. And what we have seen is that pressure from the public can have real impact. Next slide. So, as you know, that there's a federal stimulus bill, and a lot of people have been talking about how that might be what is going to fill the gap for this year. So we have heard that the federal stimulus should be spending about $1.3 billion to Philly to spend over the next 24 months as COVID relief. What we know is that officials have said that Philly had to close a more than $700 million budget gap and faces a $450 million shortfall in this coming fiscal year. And people are thinking that this money is going to fill that gap. SEPTA is looking at $350 million deficit, and the airport says that they have also faced a multi-million-dollar loss because of the pandemic. So even with filling the shortfall from the cuts from last year, we know that we were underfunded before the pandemic hit. Council people have said that we should rest assured that this budget will be okay because of the stimulus, but we know that we cannot rest. We need to understand and start to put measures in place to fill the gap in upcoming fiscal years and generate revenue from existing wealth in the city. Next slide. Here you can see some key points in this year's budget process. Generally, the mayor puts out his priorities and budget in March, but this year he postponed that date until April 15th so that his budget can take into consideration the federal stimulus that we're going to get. Between the mayor's address and June, City Council will hold hearings about the budget and put forth the recommendations through the Appropriations Committee. The budget will then be voted on by City Council before the end of June so that we have a budget in place by the beginning of fiscal year, July 1st. There are usually a few times at the end of the year and before March of next year where mid-year transfers can take place. And part of this teach-in is to see how groups are educating themselves, organizing, and learning about the budget, being able to identify what our priorities are and finding places to plug into the process and building power by coming together. So here's just a timeline. In general, this is about how it looks every year, and it doesn't really change. And some of us have lived through times when the city did not pass a budget before the fiscal year, and we know the impacts of that. So now we're going to talk about how it looked like over this pandemic. In the next slide. So if we look at people who technically make the decisions on the budget, we'll have the mayor and city council, the city council president who can control that process for how the budget goes through the council, and council appropriations committee that finalizes what is put into the budget that is voted on by the whole council. So technically, these are the folks who are making those decisions. But what we want people to realize, and what we all realize, is that we also have power to influence the decisions that are being made in this budget. Throughout the timeline, throughout the year, we can insert ourselves, or better yet, collectively come together to voice what we want to see in the budget and where we think the city should get that revenue from. Next slide. So who really runs Philadelphia? As Shane was talking about and Paul was talking about, we have educators, people who work in libraries, teachers and support staff, student access centers, childcare staff. For health and hygiene, we see nurses and other healthcare workers, sanitation and water treatment on the streets and in our buildings, personal care workers, SEPTA workers. Next slide. And what the pandemic really has highlighted was the inequities that already existed in our communities: food insecurity, rent and housing insecurity, focus on mental health needs, who we see who are really the essential workers, people delivering packages and takeout, working in grocery and corner stores, providing free meals and groceries, restaurant and delivery workers, all these healthcare workers, people doing COVID testing. We have now seen how some workers have a vehicle in unions to fight back, but we want to include everyone, including city workers who have lost their job during this time. So who really runs Philadelphia? As we support city workers, we see city workers supporting grassroots organizations in our communities as we support them. And as union workers, city workers, and grassroots organizations, we know that they can't all do it alone, which is where we all need to come together to fight back against the deep cuts and find ways to make sure we're generating revenue sources to fully fund our city services. And in the next slide. So over 500 city jobs were taken away this past fiscal year, and almost 1,000 parks and recs positions were lost or not filled. City workers know that revenue is down and it's going to be a hard win to have improvements in this revenue crisis, but we think that we need to lay the groundwork to move forward to realize that there is revenue we can generate in this city. The idea is to continue planting these seeds so that we can have mass movement around defunding the police, organizing around taxing the rich and fully funding city services. City workers want to engage with the budget process, and they also represent at least 2% of our population. Next slide. So I just wanted to take us back to what happened last year before the pandemic. So last year, when Mayor Kenny put forth his proposed budget, as he had planned to do in March, we saw a response to community advocacy with increases in departments to address anti-poverty and some vital city services. We were a little surprised that there was even an increase in some of these services. Next slide. And as we all know, the pandemic hit and the city had to close down to keep all of us safe. Mayor Kenny revised his budget to have dramatic cuts to all of the departments except for police and prisons. We saw that street sweeping had been cut, seasonal and temporary workers were cut and or not rehired in Philadelphia Parks and Rec, as well as throughout the library system. These predominantly were workers who were often Black and brown workers. Next slide. And then, as we have seen, which is not the first time, but I think the pandemic really influenced the public's response to coming out against police brutality. As we saw the people coming together, I mean, part of it was that we were in our homes and we wanted to be able to be around other people safely. So many of us came out, millions of people across the US and Philadelphia rose up in protest against the police killings of Black people like George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Walter Wallace. And a call to defund the police began locally and nationally. And for the, it was amazing to see the response that defund the police became a really mainstream call. Next slide. And we wanted, we thought that City Council would actually listen. So we heard that after witnessing the public outcry of the murder of George Floyd, City Council made a lot of gestures of support. They made statements, they came out and they kneeled. There were some new programs that were intended to address racial injustice. However, the establishment council members wanted full control over the process and did as much as they could to not let us into actually passing the budget. So what you see here is how, even though there was a lot of rhetoric about supporting defunding the police, when it actually came time to putting forth the budget, they made it really hard for us to have input. So whether it was not having a lot of time for public comment or really going through appropriations and passing the budget literally late into the night. The next slide. So we do consider it a little bit of a win because of the defund the police movement. We saw that instead of the increase, which would have been $19 million that was supposed to go to the police, that increase was scrapped. What we did see was that $14 million was transferred to another department. So they saw it as a little bit of a defund the police, but we know is that they just shifted money around and it was still not enough. Next slide. So to add insult to injury, what we saw is that even though that they did not do the $19 million increase, when I had talked earlier about how there's mid-year transfers, at the end of last year, they did a mid-year transfer to the police. So what you saw was that they actually put that money back in, and that we, they might have thought that we didn't notice, but this is why it's really important for all of us to keep an eye on what the budget process is, even through, not just in this budget season, but we consider this the budget season, but throughout the year, and knowing we have that impact that we can make even for those mid-year transfers. Next slide. So just to look at the general fund for this fiscal year, so fiscal year 2021, you can see that the police and prisons and criminal justice make up about 1/4 of the general fund for the city. Next slide. So what we know is that we need to organize. And although a lot of the new different types of revenue sources that are there may not be able to go into effect before June of this year, we know it's a slow process, but we need everyone to understand that the money is there and that the revenue that we can generate to actually fully fund our city services already exist in Philadelphia if we're willing to come together and push city council and the mayor to look at them as revenue sources to be able to tax the rich and fully fund our services. I'm going to hand it over to Britt.
I am doing the Zoom thing, talking on mute. Hey, everybody, my name is Britt, she, her pronouns. I'm with the Action Center on Race and the Economy by day, and everything else is Philly Power Research. So shout out to Philly Power Research folks. Ermi said where she is, so I'm also in the Winfield section of the city, and have been a part of Philly Power Research for, I guess, about four years now. So it's been really cool to see the different ways that we can help support groups and organizing in the city. So I think that Ermi threw me the ultimate alley-oop here in saying that the money is there. So we are just gonna take a quick trivia break. Anybody who knows me knows that I love a good quiz to just engage people in these conversations. So there's 3 questions. I'm gonna read them out and I need you all to drop the letter. I will not judge if you get them wrong, just like bigger is probably better. That is my hint for this. So the first question is, or statement is, US billionaires increased their wealth by X in the first 3 months of the pandemic. Throw it in the chat. Is it A, 10 million, B, 530 million, D, 2 billion, or excuse me, C, 2 billion, or D, 500 billion? Okay, let me look in the chat. Ooh, someone's being conservative. I see a 2 billion. The answer is definitely D, $500 billion. Brian Roberts, CEO of Comcast, grew his wealth by X percent in the last year. Is it A, 2%, B, 8%, C, 17%, D, 12.5%? What do we got? Okay, all right, yes, C. And last but not least, the city pays X to Wall Street and interest expenses on their debt. A, nearly 400 million. B, why would we be paying Wall Street? C, 100 million. And if you can go to the next slide. Yes, Stan Shapiro has the right answer. Why the hell would we be paying Wall Street? So the first one was 500 billion. Brian Roberts increased his wealth by 17%, and the city pays nearly $400 million a year on their debt to Wall Street expenses. And I think that this is really important to highlight because, as people have said, outside of just like austerity always kills, right? It kills during a pandemic, it kills when it's not a pandemic, but we really saw the ways that our social safety net was in ruins because of this pandemic. And I think it's really important to highlight the ways that these pandemic profiteers, that's what we've been calling them, or the ultra wealthy, who've been growing their wealth during the largest economic crisis since the Great Depressions by some accounts, have not contributed to our systems. And you can go to the next slide. So these pandemic profiteers, they make their money by extracting our time, by extracting our labor or our work, by extracting our wealth and our money so that they can enrich themselves. And I did this on one of the presentations we did last year, but when we combined the top billionaires in the state of Pennsylvania, that was actually, they were equivalent to the net worth of 71 Beyoncés. And anyone who's a fan, as I am, knows that we would rather have 71 Beyoncés, but really we don't want any billionaires, because why should there be billionaires when we don't have what we need? Next slide. So if these people aren't paying their taxes or their fair share, where do you all think this money is going? So just put it in the chat and I'll read some out, but where are these rich people paying or spending their money? Because they're definitely not spending it on our budgets. Stock market, Panama, abroad, saving it, yeah. Yachts, Florida mansions, love it. Hoarding it, nothing else, just having shit. Private security, yes. Buying more of our land, yep. Speculating, all of those things, yep. Offshore accounts. I think it's super important to highlight the ways that, you know, this financialized economy, or the way that they invest their money allows them to make more money, and we just don't have access to it if we don't choose to be bold and tax that money. Next slide, please. So we're just going to run through some of these wealth hoarders that are in the city and talk about, what they've been spending their money on, who they are, and then we'll walk into the different demands that the Philly Revenue Project has developed through their Tax the Rich PHL platform. These are the people who we can tax. So I think what Ermi said is very important. This is not for shortage of rich people in the city. Like, that's not a thing. There are people who can pay more taxes. They are actively working to not pay those taxes through lobbying, through aligning with corporate interests, whether they be elected officials or these corporate players. They find ways, loopholes, so that they can keep their money, hoard their money, and starve our budgets of the things that they need. So we already talked about Brian Roberts. I think Paul brought Brian Roberts up, CEO of Comcast. Comcast has not paid any property taxes on their $1.2 billion technology center, and they won't until 2027. That's what we call foregone tax revenue, revenue that otherwise could have been put into our city services, into our public budgets, that is going to continue to make profits for Comcast because they're able to save it and invest it and spend it in the ways that they want, not in the ways that we need. Next slide, please. All right, we have Brandywine CEO Jerry Sweeney. For him, I'm just gonna dig into some of the juicy, do we have any good juicy stuff? We didn't do it for this one. But I think it is also important to highlight how these people spend their money. So on Brian Roberts, you'll see he has Florida condos and mansions and all of these things. But this developer, he made $5.3 million. And I think if you all take a look at our report when we release it, you'll also be able to see how much these pandemic profiteers increased their wealth since the beginning of the pandemic. And he was one of the people who was able to increase his wealth during the pandemic when unemployment was completely skyrocketing. Next slide, please. Okay, America's least wanted, yes. Then we have Amy Gutman with their $14 billion endowment, UPenn's endowment. She makes $3.9 million a year. They gave a small donation of $100 million to the city for the school district over a 10-year period. I want to highlight the work that so many people from Penn for Pilots and Philly J with J were doing to move these mega nonprofits. And we should really highlight that, $100 million is not enough. This is a donation for an organization, a wealth-driven organization that has a $14 billion investment. We should also highlight that these players don't operate in isolation. So I've taken a look at some of their financial records. They invest in private equity vehicles. They invest in fossil fuel corporations and prop them up through their financing mechanisms. So, there's an impact, a real impact that these investments have on our quality of life, on the world that we live in, not just in like the tax sphere, but also in the ways that it impacts the climate. Next slide, please. I think there's these pandemic profiteers or wealthy players. And then there's this other part that so many people have called attention to, which is defund the police. And that is because the city has completely bloated Philly's budget. I think it's right around 20% of our whole general fund is spent on policing, and that isn't always accounting for prisons, that isn't always accounting for judicial courts, that isn't always accounting for capital expenses. We have clearly invested in this structure that doesn't keep us safe, that doesn't give us what we need. There is no correlation between increased spending costs for policing and safer communities. We know that if people had what they needed, our city would look so much different and people could make and live different lives. So we want to make sure that we are pushing back heavily on this conversation around cops keeping us safe and needing to funnel all of our resources into police when that has not translated into anything for our communities, specifically Black and Brown communities in the city. Next slide, please. And so we started talking about this, but austerity costs and austerity kills, right? Like there are real impacts. People really feel austerity or these deep cuts or privatizations, whether it be through job loss, whether it be through inability to get the services that they need for medical treatment, whether it be because our water bills are about to go up, right? And we have a public water utility, which is amazing. And we are about to see a rate hike because the department doesn't have what it needs to completely fund its infrastructure and to make sure that we can have affordable water, which we know is a basic necessity. It's pretty crazy. This is World Water Week that we are thinking about and talking about how we're going to increase our water in a time when water is what's keeping us safe and protecting us against a global pandemic. Next slide, please. So I am going to run quickly through our demands. I am going to encourage people to look at the report when it comes out, because I am not a fan of diving super deep into these wonky details of our tax policies, but I think that it's important that people know. Alrighty, so our primary demands or buckets are to tax the rich and fully fund our communities, to defund the police, to invest in treatment, not trauma, by defunding the police, and to cancel Wall Street. So we'll hop into some of those if you can go to the next slide. So tax the rich and fully fund our communities is sort of like point blank, tax them and fund our communities. But we do have very specific ways that we want to do this. There's some existing campaigns that we want to lift up. So ending the 10-year tax abatement, not reforming it, not pausing it, ending it. And then another is to collect payment in lieu of taxes. Right now, the mega nonprofits are not being taxed on the properties that they own. So payment in lieu of taxes will provide a way to get revenue from them. Next slide. We also have a wealth tax, and that will be a tax on individual and corporate holdings of stocks and bonds. So the stocks and bonds, or value of the stocks and bonds that corporations and individuals hold, excluding your 401k or your pension. So we're not trying to touch those. We know that that's what helps people live full lives post-work. Double the gross receipts tax. This is currently at the lowest rate in its history. And we know that we're able to use taxation to get some revenue in, especially on businesses that are making a lot of money, not the small businesses. We don't want to hurt them. And then we have an unearned income tax, which is actually already on the books, and it would bring money that's going to, or excuse me, it would bring in much money that could go to the school district by basically putting more money into our budgets that we could contribute to the school district, but it's not actually enforced right now. And so if it were enforced, we think that would be a way, one, to not have to pass something new, but just to do what we already agreed to do because it's already on the books. Next slide. And the next thing is to really defund the police and invest in services that, one, keep us safe, that allow us to thrive, that allow our young people to be engaged in activities in their communities. And that is really trying to focus on treatment and not trauma. And we know that the police have caused so much trauma for families and for our communities in the city. Next slide, please. And the last one is to cancel Wall Street. So we saw that the city spends close to $400 million a year in interest expenses. So we can think about this just like we do any other expense. It is not the principal, but the money we pay on top of the principal to fund different projects in the city. There's two ways that we think we could remove Wall Street from the equation, because we know them to be predatory, exploitative, in so many different ways, discriminatory. And so we think by making sure that we have the creation of a public bank that has already passed, so congrats to all the people who worked on that. In the city, we can remove Wall Street. And also if we have the Federal Reserve, or the country's central bank, giving us direct monies, no fees, no strings attached, we could then use that money instead of relying on Wall Street, who often preys on times of chaos, preys on times of crisis to make money and profits for themselves. So those are some of the ideas that we have. Next slide, please. Great. So I am happy to answer any questions. We will make sure that when we send out the follow-up, we have some fact sheets on this work. We have a report on this work for folks to dig through, and all of us from the research working group for the Philly Revenue Project would be happy to answer any questions that people have too. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Britt, Ermi. Excellent presentation. Thanks so much. We are about to go into breakout rooms. Before we do that, I want to put into the chat one more time the fact that we have a sign-in sheet. And I just want to tell you that, like, this is extremely important, that like lets us know that you are here, that if you, that was a lot of information that we just gave you, and we are not expecting everyone to just like download that information and have it at their disposal. That like, we're going to be launching a website. We're going to be having like, fact sheets. So if you want to have access to that information, get on our email list, get this information and sign up. There's also a petition that we are putting forward. Again, the information is on the sign-in sheet. So a lot of good information on that sign-in sheet. Want to make sure that you sign in. We're going to be going into breakout rooms. We have a bunch of facilitators already set up, and we're going to be taking notes as we go on some of those questions. All the facilitators have the questions. So, Mike, you're setting that. Hello, everybody. I hope you had an excellent breakout room. I don't know about anyone else at my house. The internet just suddenly went out, and I am on my phone, just making it work right now. Yep, I completely agree. I've said it once, I'll say it 1,000 times that, the moments like this, like we need to take Comcast into the public ownership. They need to be democratically run. They need to be, controlled by the workers. And that is what I want to see, because it's not necessary to be like this. I have no notes in front of me because, again, all of everything done shut down. So I'm just going to thank you so much. That we are going to close out the evening by talking about so grateful for everyone for coming out, for being part of these breakout conversations. We have that right now we're on the part where we want to make a call to action, that we want to kind of sum up this whole action, that this whole event that we've had tonight, that there's a hashtag that we've formed of tax rich PHL to kind of get the word out, but at the same time just kind of laying the political groundwork of why exactly it is that this conversation is so important. So we saw we saw what happened in the summer when everyone's out in the streets, that actually got the city council to listen and to actually do something. It wasn't enough. It wasn't they lied to us in the process, told us that they were defunding the police. They did not defund the police. They did some creative accounting. They moved, they didn't give a raise, and they moved from money from one department to another. That is not defunding. That is just, again, creative accounting. But that we saw that when we fight, we can win. And that even when we lose, there's lessons to be learned if we take those lessons into sustained organizing and kind of refining how is it that we're going to keep struggling, how we can keep fighting. We want to be mobilized through these next steps, there's some actions that are going to be, that we're going to be putting out there. We definitely want to ask people to, get invested in this, to get involved, first off by, again, signing that sign-in sheet, to get more information from us. This whole organization is about not only organizing but about information gathering. And if people don't take the information and run with it, then what is it for? You'll be able to get emails from us, get information from us about like the next steps happening. That we want to, again, like, making the point that the sustained action along with these, actions out in the street. I think who is going to take it over from here? I forget.
It's you.
So here are some of the events that are happening up next. There's going to be a march for pilots at Penn and Drexel. That's happening Tuesday, March 30th at 4:30 p.m. We have these tiny URL links to all these events. There's going to be another event for the Library Friends Virtual Day of Action on April 1st. That's an all-day event. So this is going to be asking people to be virtually in support of the libraries. We also have another action for Fund Our City is a budget action at City Hall. And so this is going to be, surrounding the mayor's announcement of the budget, after, the stimulus we've gotten, so that, again, we completely realize that we're going to need to keep fighting, that we are, people also in the chat saying that, full funding is no joke for April 1st. Absolutely. Again, look out for that event that's going to be happening in mid-April, either the 13th or the 15th, surrounding the mayor's announcement of the budget. Yeah, it was, like I said, all of my notes are gone. Was there anything else? I think just thank y'all for coming is what we wanted to say at this point. It's been an excellent event. Please do not leave without signing out and without signing in to the event. And yeah, just thank you everyone for coming.
Definitely sign in. We're going to send out the fact sheets and the website that's going to be coming out, as well as this presentation for you to watch again or to share with other people. But definitely sign in and get involved with Philly Revenue Project. We're a coalition that is trying to get the word out there and form this collective power. Have a good night, everybody.